Perfect. So my name is Simango, and I'm the Senior Manager of Academic Support Services at Rhodes University Library in Grahamstown, South Africa. Presentation is titled The Quest for Strategic Alignment, and it's pretty much a case study of how the Rhodes University Library sought to achieve strategic alignment. Just to acknowledge San Jose State University as a founding partner for this event. So let's look at the outline of my presentation. I'll start off by going through the expected outcomes, background, and I'll cover strategic alignment, the library's value chain, and then I'll finish off with a recap. So let's start off by looking at the expected outcomes. The idea is to trace the emergence of the library's value chain. So firstly, one should at least understand how the library value chain directly emerges from the university strategic framework. And secondly, understanding how these focus areas from the strategic framework actually translate into the primary and support activities that generate value for the university library stakeholders. This will become a bit clearer during the course of the presentation. So a bit of the background. We should start off by actually looking at the definition of alignment. And here's some examples of alignment if you just look that up online. But a better description, or at least definition, is of strategic alignment, or if you focus on strategic alignment, is that it's a process of planning and implementing practices to ensure an organization's strategy support its general objectives. And that's pretty much what we're trying to actually achieve, not just at the library level, but to have some kind of alignment between the library and the institution as a whole, and then from the library's executive management downwards to the operational level. So what does alignment look like? Well, it looks something sort of like this, where you have a state of alignment and non-alignment, where everything is actually jumbled up when things are not aligned, as you can see from the Rubik's Cube. And what you want is to actually have a state where everything is actually aligned and looking neat, like on the right-hand side. So let's start off by considering what the achievement of strategic alignment actually entails. You would generally have strategic development where you actually develop a strategy, and then that strategy development combined with the implementation of the strategy is what actually leads to strategic alignment. Now, it's important to note that strategic alignment is not something that actually exists in isolation. It's actually part of a broader process that actually entails starting off with formulating a strategy, and then you align the strategy, and then you actually execute the strategy, and then finally you'll perform an analysis and evaluation of the results. But the core focus of this presentation is on the second step, the strategic alignment part. So what does strategic alignment actually entail if we actually have to go into a deep dive of this concept? Well, insofar as this relates to the Rhodes University Library, we start off by looking at what's called the Institutional Development Plan, or the IDP, which basically embodies the university's strategy. Now, the IDP actually outlines the university's vision, its mission, as well as its core values. So what we try to do is to ensure that whatever we did was actually aligned with the university's institutional development plan. Now, from this IDP, what you can actually extract is the university's mission, which is described as a three-pronged mission, and it addresses three core aspects: teaching and learning, research, and community engagement. So those are the three things that the university tries to actually focus on. So the library sought to also focus on those things amongst others. Now, generally, when institutions work on the development of strategies, it is commonplace to actually make use of tools such as strategy houses. And this is what you actually see on the screen now. Strategy house, which has a mission statement, themes such as goals and initiatives, etc. So at the Rhodes University Library, we actually developed our own library strategy house. There you see it with its own roof. It's got a floor and walls. The most important part here would actually be the horizontal layers that you see. So the bottom the bottom level there has community engagement as a horizontal layer, and on top of that there's another horizontal layer which is research support, and on top of that you actually have teaching and learning support, and those are actually derived directly from the university's three-pronged mission. So we try to ensure that when we looked at the library's information resources, the services and facilities, as well as skills, programs, and projects, that they actually addressed the university's three-pronged mission of speaking to teaching and learning support, research support, as well as community engagement. Now, in terms of going forward, there are several strategic frameworks, so to speak, if I can call them that, that the library actually considered making use of. And on the screen, you see several examples of these. And out of these options, we opted to go with the balanced scorecard, which was developed by Robert Kaplan and David Norton from Harvard University. The reason we chose this is because the balanced scorecard had actually had a lot of success in the corporate world. And even though it was initially developed to be used for corporate purposes, it could be customized and used by nonprofit organizations such as academic institutions. And generally, the way that looks is that at the top level, it addresses things such as missions and visions of institutions, and then you actually have a business objectives that are actually embodied in what's known as a strategy map. And this is a generic balanced scorecard, which actually looks at financial aspects, customer aspects, internal processes, as well as organizational capacity, and how these actually allow an institution to actually track the degree to which it's actually meeting its objectives. So an institution will have targets and measures and initiatives. So we sought to actually sort of like, I won't say replicate this, but to adapt this and to customize it to our own unique context. Just wanted to make this a bit clearer so that people can see it, because the previous slide was a bit fuzzy. So this is what the end result looked like for the library. We actually had a strategy map here. And this strategy map itself was actually derived directly from the strategy house. You can see the little bubbles there on the horizontal layers. They basically embody what are known as the strategic focus areas. So community engagement is one of those areas, research support is one of those, and teaching and learning is one as well. Now, you will recall that when I actually went through the strategy house, I made reference to the fact that the university had a three-pronged mission that was actually addressed teaching and learning, research support, and community engagement. Now, these three what I call it aspects also show up in the strategy map. So if we go back to the strategy map, if you look at the purple row here, what you'll see is that it addresses teaching and learning. The yellow one addresses research support, and community engagement is the red one here. And these are essentially fleshed out in the strategy map. So the strategy map essentially fleshes out what you see in the strategy house. What you won't see here is what's in our actual strategic framework document, where we actually unpack these bubbles, so to speak, that you see in the strategy map. So this is essentially a summary of the strategic framework document itself. Perhaps a better summary is what we refer to as a one-page strategic framework. So we distilled the entire strategic framework into one page. And you can see that this document addresses things such as the mission and the vision and goals, as well as the institutional goals of the university. And then what we try to do is to ensure that each of the strategic focus areas, such as teaching and learning, research support, and community engagement, insofar as we try to address them at the library level, are actually aligned with the institutional goals that you'd find in the institutional development plan. That therefore ensured that what we were trying to do was actually aligned with what the university as a whole was trying to do institutionally. So going forward, then, that actually then brings me to a bit of a question in terms of what is strategic alignment. We start off by looking at alignment, but if we look at what strategic alignment then equals, in this case, it amounts to a process of synchronizing an organization's objectives, resources, and operations. Now, I did define alignment at the beginning, but I just wanted to get back to that point to see that what we were trying to do is basically synchronize what the library was doing with what the university was doing. Now, there are several things that can pose as challenges, but I won't actually address that in this presentation. But it suffices to point out that alignment actually entails aligning processes, systems, and people. Now, this process does entail several aspects, and this is a bit different from what I mentioned when I say that strategic alignment is part of a process, but strategic alignment itself also entails sub-processes, if I can actually put it that way. The key objective that we're actually trying to achieve, though, is to ensure that, as I pointed out, we have alignment at several tiers. So alignment at tier one, which is the organization-wide institutional focus. And then the second tier has to do with the business units, for example, the library. And then the third tier would be within the library itself. That is the library's teams and the individuals working in the library. So you want to make sure that there's a golden thread running from tier one all the way through to the third tier. Now, it is important to ensure that during that process that one avoids silos, because when you look at tier one and you go to the second tier, you find that you have different departments such as library or business units, and then you have different teams and different individuals. And this is why we actually try to make use of the balanced scorecard approach to make sure that we actually maintain that kind of alignment at the institution. Now, this alignment actually entails a bit of a cascading approach because you're running through tiers from the top tier, tier one, all the way down to the third tier. But if you break it down a little bit, what you'll find is that at the library level, you'll be looking at the executive management, such as working with the director and deputy directors. And then you have managers that report to these deputy directors. And then we'd have other librarians reporting to those managers. And we had to make sure that the strategy actually aligned by cascading downwards. So this is a bit of a bottom-up, top-down approach, actually, when you look at it, because the balanced scorecard does take a top-down approach. And just to give you a sense of what this actually looked like, if we zoom in a little bit, you'll find that our library, if you looked at that at the institution level, has functional units. In this case, the Rhodes University Library has a user services section and a technical services section. And if you peer into the user services section, which I oversee, there's a learning support and community engagement division. We have digital scholarship as well as faculty liaison services. And if we just go in a bit into the learning support as well as community engagement one, what you'll find is that there's a manager there, and there are two departments in that division, namely undergraduate support and circulation. And if you zoomed into the undergraduate support department, you'd find that there's a librarian and an assistant librarian. In this case, what we're trying to achieve is alignment running all the way from the top, from the library director, all the way down to the assistant librarian level. And you'd also want alignment from library director going all the way up to the university's vice chancellor, so to speak. So it's organizational alignment outside of the library externally, as well as internally within the library. Now, there is a danger of having silos, and that is something that we're actually trying to avoid, which is something that can pretty much occur in any organization. So the approach was to actually look at it from the view of a horizontal organization, in terms of which you have people that are actually working in different departments or divisions. So by way of example, in this slide, you have people working in customer services, sales department, and inventory, as well as payment processes, but they're working on similar projects collectively. So you'll find that one project will have people from various divisions working on it. So you actually break through the silos in that case. And that's the kind of approach that we wanted to actually take. And that brings us then to the library value chain, which is what we made use of in order to try to break through the silos. So the person that you see here is Professor Michael Porter, who's a guru in the field of strategic management. He published a book called Competitive Advantage way back in 1985. And in this book, it really focused on the strategic aspects pertaining to an organization. And he developed a model known as the value chain in this book. And we basically looked at this value chain and thought that we can make use of it. So, what is a value chain? Well, a value chain essentially is a series of consecutive steps or activities that a business takes to create and deliver a product or service to its customers. It's an example of a value chain of a company. It's just I'll call it a generic value chain. And here's another example. And basically, what it actually embodies is a process where you can see the raw materials being converted through a factory and then eventually transported on a truck all around the world or anywhere to a shop and until they're eventually consumed by a consumer. And we wanted to see how we could apply that to the library. And there are other examples here. For instance, there's Amazon's value chain analysis. And what this showed us is that it is possible, if you look at the nitty gritty granular aspects rather, you can see that the value chains could actually be customized at an institutional level. So we thought, well, let's try to give that a go. So I've already defined what a value chain is, but if we actually have to look at what a library value chain is, if we customize that specifically to an academic library, we can look at it as we can define a value chain as value chain. The library value chain is a chain that involves the processes of creating, acquiring, organizing, and delivering information resources and services to users. So let's have a look at what this value chain actually looked like. So as a start, the value chain had primary activities and support activities. So the first primary activities was collection, development, acquisition. Then you had the catalog and metadata management, access and circulation, information services, and curation services. Now, these primary activities represent, for the most part, the activities that are actually performed by librarians, professional librarians themselves. Whereas the support activities, which are no less important, but simply are activities that actually support the primary activities. So these would be things that are not necessarily tasks that are not performed, activities that are not performed by librarians, such as information technology, infrastructure facilities. You have management and administration, although you could argue that the management aspect is something that is performed by librarians occupying higher levels within the library. And then you also have leadership and governance, which falls into that same category. So how was this library chain, value chain developed? Well, we basically had sessions with the library managers in terms of which we actually fleshed out the activities that they actually performed within their units. So we sort of like adopted a bit of a bottom-up approach instead of a pure balanced scorecard top-down approach, where we actually worked out the activities that are actually performed, and then we actually mapped them within the value chain itself. So when you actually look at the value chain, what you'll find is that if you look at the columns, starting with the primary activities here, we actually try to align that with the three-pronged mission of the university to ensure that there was alignment between the value chain and the strategic frameworks. So we try to ensure that we would look at things that address teaching and learning, research support, as well as community engagement. We actually split community engagement up so that it could actually address community engagement as well as partnerships and collaborations, because in our strategy these are actually fused together simply because we look at the community as being anyone who's not a staff member or student at our university. So this could be members of the community, people who live in this town where I reside, as well as members of other universities. So for instance, for interlibrary loans purposes, we could send books to other institutions, and those would be members of the community simply because they're not staff members or students at Rhodes University. But a similar argument could be made for partnerships and collaborations, in the sense that our partners are not staff and students at the university, but what we do with them does not necessarily amount to community engagement. It's not necessarily always volunteering or things of that sort. So we sought to simply separate those two when we looked at the value chain. So starting off with the first primary activity, we looked at collection, development, and acquisition. And this is a simplified version of the results. This is what we actually wound up with. We looked at cataloging and metadata management, and we mapped out the activities as well. Same thing for access and circulation, for reference and information services, as well as for preservation and archiving activities. So what you'd see is a running thread there where you can see that the activities that are represented, these primary activities, are all segmented or mapped to the three-pronged mission in terms of teaching and learning, research support, and community engagement for the most part. We then follow the same procedure for the support activities with regards to facilities and infrastructure, as well as information technology. Again, I should stress that this is a simplified version of what we wound up with. We have actual documents where this is actually more fleshed out, but it was easier to actually display this in a presentation like this on 2 slides. But it's quite a relatively accurate representation in summary form. So then just to recap then what I've gone through in this presentation, the idea is that we started off by looking at what we had in the library strategic framework document, addressing things such as teaching and learning, research support, and community engagement, and try to ensure that these actually were actually connected or aligned with the institutional development plan. And from there on, we try to ensure that there's alignment going downwards within the library itself. So external alignment as well as internal alignment. So the way we did this is we actually made use of the balanced scorecard, as I pointed out. Here's an example of this generic balanced scorecard. And we customize that to our own strategy map, which is a byproduct of the balanced scorecard approach. And this strategy map actually allowed us to actually align the strategic framework with the university's three-pronged mission, as you can see by looking at those roles. Teaching and learning, research support, and community engagement were definitely addressed. But then we also wanted to ensure that we could have strategic alignment, and that's how we actually combined the balanced scorecard with the value chain. This kind of alignment allowed us to actually have alignment between 3 tiers at the organization level, at the business unit level, that's the library, as well as the 3rd tier with the library's teams and individuals. And this process entailed cascading the strategy from the highest levels all the way down to the bottom, whilst trying to actually avoid silos. And the best way that we could do that was by making use of a horizontal organization approach to make sure that we broke down those silos. And it was interesting to see that what we came to find out is that several librarians were actually involved in various aspects of the value chain. So they would be involved in collection development, and then to a certain degree, metadata management or cataloging, access and circulation, information services, and curation services. They were generally involved in at least 4 out of 5 of the primary activities. And so what you see now is a value chain that we actually came up with, which depicted the library's primary activities, the core business, so to speak, as well as the support activities, which are the activities which actually support the library's primary activities. And this was embodied in the customized library value chain. And this actually allowed us to actually break through the silos conceptually in terms of how the value chain itself was developed. And if one wanted to actually dive deeper into how that actually looked like, this is a representation, a visual representation of what the value chain looked like in tabular form. And what we found is that we were able to actually align the 3-pronged mission aspects as teaching and learning, research support, as well as community engagement with the various primary library activities that are embodied in the value chain. And we also did a similar thing for the support activities that actually are part of the value chain. So we aligned the value chain with the library's strategic framework as embodied in the strategy map. And that strategy map was actually aligned with the university's institutional development plan. And that brings me to my end, but I just want to I'll make some special acknowledgments. I want to acknowledge Library 2.0 for organizing this event. I want to acknowledge San Jose State University for hosting this event. I'd like to acknowledge the Morrison Center at the University of Illinois Library. That's how I actually came to find out about Library 2.0. And I'd like to acknowledge Rhodes University, my employer. And based on the content of this presentation, as you can see, the university actually allowed me to develop content that I could actually use as a basis of my presentation. Thank you very much. Are there any questions from anyone?
Thank you so much, Sam, for this really thorough and deep dive into the presentation. I do have some questions, but I will let people post them in the chat. I don't want to take up all the time, but while we're waiting for people to post questions and you're getting applause, um, at the very beginning, I noticed, and I can't recall the years, this was like a 5-year plan. Was it 23 to 28?
That's correct. That's the university's institutional development plan. That was a 5-year plan.
And what was the actual planning length that to go through all this in the library?
So it took some time. So I should point out that so I arrived at the end of the first year of that institutional development plan. But after the university had actually developed the plan, it then lifted up to the units. So it's about 6 years if you look at it that way. So it gave the units time to actually develop their strategic frameworks. So that took about a year or so, I think, if I remember correctly. And then the idea was then to cascade that strategic framework downwards. So one of the features of the balance scorecard is that it takes a while to actually sort of like roll out. So you have the strategy and then you can have the operational aspect of it sort of like coming afterwards. Um, it's very difficult to do them in parallel, so to speak. So it ends up being one of those things where the institutional development plan can come out in year number one, and then in year number two, you find that everyone is working on their strategies afterwards.
Oh, it is very thorough. And this is an ongoing process that is reviewed on a regular basis.
That that is correct. At
We have
least probably annually.
we have a question here in the chat. You may have spoken to this, but how long did it take to develop the library value chain for your library?
The exercise itself, I can say maybe about 3 to 4 months. Like, because it involved consultation. So the idea was, okay, we've got the strategy in place, but to operationalize it, let's actually meet with all of the actual managers. Now we're a relatively small library with about less than 40 librarians. So about 10 managers or so. So there were conversations with those managers, and then the managers had conversations with the librarians reporting to them. But with those conversations, we're actually then able to actually map out the activities. And then from that, we would go, it was an iterative process where we went back to the manager, say, does the plan, I mean, does the value chain actually reflect the activities in the essence? Is there something you want to delete or something that you actually want to add? And then the final result actually reflected the thinking of the executive management as well as the managers and the librarians who reported to them. But it's something that can actually be done in about, I think in about 3 to 4 months. If it was the only thing you're focusing on, it could be done quicker.
Well, thank you. We're at the end of our time. I want to thank you, but I also want to let everybody know that this presentation has been recorded and it will be online probably tomorrow, that you can come back through and look at the slides in more depth and listen to this again. So thank you so much to our participants and thank you so much to our presenter. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.